You're dead already. You just don't know it yet. Let me explain. Right now, at this very moment, you're sitting comfortably. You're warm. You've eaten recently. You can pause this whenever you want. These three simple facts, comfort, food, choice, would make you catastrophically unsuited for survival as a ninja in feudal Japan. Within your first hour in their world, you'd violate a rule you didn't know existed. Within your first day, you'd be captured. And what happened after capture? We'll get to that. But here's what you need to understand first. Ninja torture wasn't designed to extract information quickly. It was designed to extract everything, slowly, over days or weeks. Every technique you knew, every name, every safe house, every password, every secret your clan had trusted you with. And here's the twist nobody tells you. The ninjas weren't supernatural. They were ordinary humans who'd been systematically damaged, physically, psychologically, morally, until they became functional in conditions that would paralyze you. The training didn't enhance them. It broke them in specific ways, then built them back wrong. Wrong for normal life. Right for a world of shadows and death. Tonight, I'm going to show you their real world. Not Hollywood's version. The actual historical truth from primary sources. The Banson's Hukai Ninja Encyclopedia from 1676. The Shoninki from 1681. Portuguese missionary accounts. Japanese war chronicles. And archaeological evidence from the two mountain regions that created Japan's shadow warriors. And buried in these sources is something most people miss. Something that changes everything about how we understand ninjas. But we'll get there. First, you need to see where they came from. The origins. Geography creates assassins. The shinobi emerged from a geographic accident. Two mountain provinces, Iga and Koka, sat near Kyoto, Japan's political center, but isolated by terrain so rugged that controlling them cost more than the poor land was worth. This created a power vacuum, and in that vacuum, something dark evolved. The earliest references to shinobi-like fighters appear in the Taiheki Chronicle from around 1370, describing irregular warriors using night raids and arson during the wars between rival imperial courts. But these weren't yet the organized ninja clans. They were desperate fighters using unconventional tactics because they lacked resources for conventional warfare. The true ninja profession emerged later, in the 15th century, as Japan descended into the Sengoku period, 150 years of nearly continuous warfare. And here's the first reveal that changes the story. Ninjas didn't start as warriors at all. They started as farmers. Iga and Koka were poor. The mountain soil couldn't support large populations. The terrain prevented the rice agriculture that created wealth elsewhere in Japan. The people there faced a simple equation: find alternative sources of income, or starve. Some became bandits, some became monks, and some, the most desperate, the most clever, or the most damaged, became shinobi. The political structure of these regions made this possible. Unlike most of Japan, which was organized under powerful daimyo lords, Iga and Koka were governed by confederations of small clans. These jizumurai, elite peasant warriors, formed mutual defense leagues called Iki. No single ruler controlled them. No lord could command their loyalty. They sold their services to whoever paid. This autonomy shaped everything about ninja culture. It meant they had no permanent allegiances. They worked for gold, not honor. They used tactics that samurai considered dishonorable because honor didn't feed starving children. And they developed skills, espionage, infiltration, sabotage, that conventional warriors wouldn't sully themselves with. The mountainous isolation provided something else crucial: training grounds invisible to outsiders. In these hidden valleys, techniques could be developed, tested, and refined without enemy observation. Young boys, and the training always started young, could learn to move silently, to climb impossible surfaces, to endure conditions that would kill softer children from the plains. There's also a spiritual dimension to the origins, though it's more practical than mystical. The Iga and Koka mountains were centers of Shugendo, an esoteric Buddhist practice emphasizing extreme physical discipline and survival in harsh conditions. Yamabushi mountain monks who practiced Shugendo already had many skills useful for ninja work: breath control, endurance, herbalism, and knowledge of mountain terrain. Whether ninjas borrowed directly from Yamabushi or simply shared their environment is debatable, but the connection suggests something important. The skills that made effective ninjas weren't invented from nothing. They were adapted from existing mountain survival traditions, modified for military and intelligence purposes. By the late 15th century, Iga and Koka warriors had established reputations as unconventional warfare specialists. The watershed moment came in 1487, when General Ashikaga Yoshihisa led an army against the Rokaku clan. Koka warriors employed guerrilla tactics, night attacks, fires, ambushes that prevented direct confrontation. For 3 years, they harassed a superior force, never allowing the decisive battle the enemy wanted. Eventually, the general died in battle, and his forces withdrew. This victory established Koka's reputation and demonstrated a crucial principle. In warfare, avoiding defeat is sometimes more valuable than seeking victory. The Koka warriors hadn't destroyed the enemy army. They'd simply made victory too expensive to pursue. It was a lesson that would define ninja operations for the next century. But here's what's often missed in romantic retellings. This wasn't about honor or skill. It was about survival. The Koka warriors fought this way because they had no choice. In open battle, they would have been slaughtered. Guerrilla warfare was desperation tactics, not preference. And that desperation would shape everything that came after. Because once you've survived by violating every code of honorable warfare, once you've proven that deception and ambush can defeat superior forces, there's no going back. You've crossed a line. You've become something other than a conventional warrior. You've become shinobi. The term ninja itself wouldn't become standard until the 19th century. During their active period, they were called shinobi, or various regional terms: Rappa, Supa, Kusa. The word ninja is just an alternate reading of the same characters, popularized in modern times, particularly after the 1967 James Bond film You Only Live Twice introduced the term to Western audiences, and it stuck. By the mid-16th century, the ninja clans had formalized their practices. They'd compiled training methods passed down through families. They'd created organizational structures with clear hierarchies. Jonin clan leaders at the top, Chunin administrators in the middle, Jinin field operatives at the bottom. They operated as a professional industry, hiring out specialized services to the highest bidder. But, and this is the second reveal that changes the narrative, their golden age lasted barely a century. The same chaos that created demand for their services would destroy them. When Japan's warlords began consolidating power, when the great unifiers emerged, autonomous communities of professional spies became intolerable threats. The ninja clan's knowledge made them dangerous. They knew secrets about multiple daimyo. They had no permanent loyalty. They could be hired by anyone. And in a unified Japan under centralized control, that flexibility was a liability, not an asset. Their destruction would be brutal, systematic, and nearly complete. But before we get to that tragedy, you need to understand what it actually took to become a ninja. Because the training wasn't just difficult. It was a selection process designed to break normal children and identify the rare ones damaged enough to survive what came next. Chamon. The world of Sengoku Japan. Context of chaos. To truly understand why ninjas existed, and why you'd die so quickly in their world, you need to see the Japan they inhabited. Not the sanitized feudal Japan of movies, but the actual Sengoku period. 150 years when central authority collapsed and the country tore itself apart. The Sengoku period, roughly 1467 to 1615, was named for its defining characteristic. Warring states, not two sides fighting, not even three or four. At various times, dozens of regional warlords called daimyo fought simultaneous wars, forming alliances that lasted weeks or months before betrayal and realignment. Imagine a country the size of California, where every province has its own army, and every leader wants to conquer their neighbors. The period began with the Onin War, 1467 to 1477, a succession dispute that escalated until armies burned Kyoto, Japan's cultural and political heart, to ashes. When the war ended, the Ashikaga shogunate that had nominally ruled Japan was revealed as powerless. The shogun could barely control Kyoto itself, let alone distant provinces. Into this power vacuum stepped hundreds of ambitious men. Some were established daimyo from old families. Some were samurai who'd murdered their lords and seized their domains. Some, like Toyotomi Hideyoshi, were literally peasants who rose through military genius and ruthless ambition. Nothing was stable. Nothing was certain. Everything was possible if you were willing to be brutal enough. The warfare itself evolved dramatically. Early Sengoku battles involved hundreds or low thousands of warriors. By the late 16th century, armies had swollen to tens of thousands. The Battle of Sekigahara in 1600, which effectively ended the period, involved over 160,000 warriors combined. This escalation was driven partly by improved agricultural productivity, which could support larger armies, but also by the introduction of firearms. In 1543, Portuguese traders arrived with arquebuses, matchlock muskets. Japanese craftsmen immediately began copying them. Within decades, Japan had more firearms than many European nations. Oda Nobunaga, one of the great unifiers, understood firearms' potential better than his rivals. At the Battle of Nagashino in 1575, he deployed 3,000 musketeers behind wooden barriers. They fired in rotating volleys, creating continuous fire that slaughtered the cavalry charges of the legendary Takeda clan. The romantic age of samurai cavalry died that day. Warfare had become industrial. For common people, the Sengoku period was sustained nightmare. Armies lived off the land, seizing crops and livestock. Villages that resisted were burned. Those that didn't often starved. Refugees fled war zones, becoming bandits or beggars. The breakdown of central authority meant the breakdown of law. Murder, rape, and robbery went unpunished unless victims could arrange private revenge. A practice emerged called Ochimusha Gari, hunting defeated warriors. After battles, peasants and bandits would ambush wounded or fleeing samurai, killing them for their armor and weapons. Even defeated warriors weren't safe. Nobody was safe. This was the environment that created demand for ninjas. When warfare is constant, when alliances shift weekly, when today's ally is tomorrow's enemy, intelligence becomes paramount. Daimyo needed to know rivals' troop strengths, food supplies, castle defenses, and secret plans. They needed to disrupt enemy operations through sabotage. They needed specific individuals eliminated through methods that couldn't be traced. Samurai couldn't do this work. Bushido, the samurai code, emphasized face-to-face combat, loyalty, and honor. Sneaking into enemy territory dressed as a peasant, hiding in attics to eavesdrop, poisoning water, supplies. These weren't things that fit samurai self-image. They needed doing, but samurai couldn't do them without dishonor. Enter the ninjas. Coming from regions outside normal feudal structures, bound by survival needs rather than aristocratic codes, the warriors of Iga and Koka were willing to do the necessary work. They infiltrated castles. They gathered intelligence on troop movements. They sabotaged supply depots. And yes, occasionally, they assassinated specific targets, though this was actually a small part of their work. But being a ninja in the Sengoku period wasn't like being a modern intelligence agent. There were no retirement plans, no insurance, no official recognition if captured. You were hired for specific missions, paid specific amounts, and expected to succeed or die trying. If captured, your employer would deny all knowledge. You couldn't reveal your employer even under torture, because betrayal meant your family in Iga or Koka would pay the price. The constant warfare also meant constant danger, even between missions. Roads were patrolled by guards, blocked by bandits, or crossed by hostile armies. Traveling required papers that could be revoked arbitrarily. Castles had sophisticated defenses specifically designed to prevent infiltration. And everyone was paranoid. In a world where anyone might be a spy, trust was suicidal. The psychological weight of living through this is almost inconceivable to modern people. We experience war as temporary disruption to normal life. The Sengoku period lasted 150 years. People were born, lived entire lives, and died without knowing peace. The idea of stable government or predictable future simply didn't exist. You survived day to day and considered yourself fortunate to see children grow up. This was the world ninjas inhabited. Not a world of exotic adventure, but one of grinding fear and sudden violence. The shadows they moved through weren't romantic. They were survival mechanisms. The secrets they kept weren't mystical teachings. They were intelligence that could save their lives or doom their families. And that training they underwent, it started young, very young. Because to survive in this world, you needed to be broken and rebuilt while your personality was still forming. By the time you were old enough to question the wisdom of becoming a ninja, you were already too damaged to be anything else. Training, forged in controlled trauma. If you were born into a ninja family in 15th or 16th century Iga or Koka, your childhood ended at age 5. This isn't speculation. This comes from the Bansen Shukai and other ninja manuals that describe training timelines. 5 years old was when systematic conditioning began. And here's the reveal that changes how we understand ninja training. It wasn't designed to create super warriors. It was designed to identify children who could survive trauma and function despite it. The early training looked almost playful. Children ages 5 to 6 practiced balancing on thin poles, elevated gradually higher. They jumped over bushes of increasing height. They ran across moss-covered planks. These exercises developed coordination and strength, yes, but they also had another purpose: identifying children who could manage fear. Because here's what the manuals don't explicitly state, but the evidence suggests. The poles got higher until some children refused to continue. The bushes got taller until some children balked at jumping. The surfaces got more unstable until some children couldn't maintain focus. Those children weren't punished. They simply weren't ninja material. They'd become farmers, or merchants, or monks. The ones who continued, either through native fearlessness, desperation to please, or psychological damage that blunted normal danger responses, moved to the next phase. By age 9, the training intensified dramatically. Physical conditioning began in earnest. Children practiced falls and rolls until they could hit ground from significant heights without injury. They performed yoga-like exercises, developing flexibility that would later allow them to squeeze through small openings or hide in impossible positions. They endured cold, standing in icy streams, sleeping outdoors in winter, training themselves to ignore discomfort that would paralyze others. They also began training in deprivation. Ninjas needed to operate on minimal food and water, so children were subjected to controlled fasts. They learned to function while hungry. They practiced breathing techniques that slowed heartbeat and respiration to near imperceptible levels. They trained themselves to sleep lightly and wake silently at the slightest disturbance. The psychological conditioning was equally systematic. Children were taught to observe constantly, notice small details, and read people's emotions. They practiced remaining motionless for extended periods, suppressing involuntary movements, controlling coughs or sneezes. They learned to manage fear through meditation, because fear causes mistakes, and mistakes cause death. As they entered their teenage years, training became specialized and dangerous. This is when they learned the 18 major categories of ninjutsu skills. The exact list varies between schools, but generally included unarmed combat techniques that could disable or kill silently, sword fighting, though ninja techniques differed from samurai methods, emphasizing speed over form, spear fighting, use of various pole weapons, the kusarigama sickle chain weapon, throwing weapons for distraction and harassment, explosives and fire starting for sabotage, disguise and impersonation, possibly the most important ninja skill, stealth and infiltration techniques, horsemanship, though not all ninjas could afford horses, water training, swimming with armor, underwater movement, breath control, strategy and tactical planning, espionage and intelligence gathering, escape and evasion techniques, weather prediction and celestial navigation, geographic analysis and terrain use, and crucially, spiritual and mental conditioning. Training in these skills wasn't gentle. Teenage students threw shuriken at targets for hours until arms trembled with exhaustion, because in missions, you might get one throw and couldn't afford to miss. They practiced sword techniques until hands bled, because in combat, survival depends on muscle memory faster than thought. They learned to make explosives from common materials because operations required improvisation. The swimming training deserves special mention for its brutality. Students learned to swim wearing armor, to move underwater for extended periods, to use hollow bamboo as primitive snorkels, to retrieve objects from underwater, to remain still in water for hours so pursuing enemies wouldn't see bubbles. This training took place in natural bodies of water, cold mountain streams, murky ponds, often in winter. No heated pools, no safety equipment, no lifeguards. If you couldn't complete exercises, you failed. If you failed repeatedly, you weren't suited for ninja work, which meant your family had wasted resources training you, which meant your survival prospects had just dramatically worsened. The disguise training was particularly comprehensive. Ninjas needed to impersonate at least 7 different social classes: monks, merchants, samurai, craftsmen, farmers, performers, and peasants. This wasn't just wearing appropriate clothes. It meant learning how each class moved, spoke, behaved. A ninja, posing as a monk, needed to know Buddhist prayers well enough to fool actual monks. A ninja posing as a merchant needed to understand goods, prices, and trading practices intimately. Any slip in disguise could expose you. So students learned psychological manipulation, how to gain trust, ask questions without seeming suspicious, read reactions and adjust performance. They studied human nature before that term existed, developing intuitive understanding that allowed them to blend in anywhere. The physical demands exceeded even samurai training. Ninjas were expected to run 200 kilometers in a day, an almost superhuman endurance feat. They practiced a specific running style, with weight centered low in the abdomen, which supposedly helped them move faster and more quietly. Whether anyone actually achieved 200 kilometers daily is uncertain, but the training certainly produced people capable of moving quickly over long distances while carrying equipment. They learned to climb anything: castle walls, cliff faces, trees. They practiced moving across rooftops, judging which tiles would support weight and which would break. They trained to jump from heights that would injure untrained people, using specific techniques to roll and distribute impact. All of this without modern equipment. No climbing gear, no safety ropes, no padding. The ground was hard. The consequences were real. And through all this training, one principle remained constant: silence. Ninjas learned to move without sound. They practiced walking techniques that minimize noise, landing on the outside of the foot and rolling inward to distribute weight gradually. They learned to control breathing to eliminate rasping or panting. They even learned to eat silently. One detail from training manuals captures the intensity. Ninjas practiced balancing a feather on their nose while breathing, training themselves to breathe so gently the feather wouldn't move. Imagine the hours, days, weeks required to develop that level of respiratory control. But here's what modern romantic versions miss. This training took place against a backdrop of poverty and hardship. These weren't well-funded military academies with professional instructors. These were mountain villages where food was often scarce, medical care primitive, childhood mortality high even without training dangers. Children trained through illness and injury. They trained in harsh weather. They trained when exhausted, hungry, cold, and afraid. Because the real world wouldn't care about discomfort, and enemies wouldn't give breaks for bad days. Modern people romanticize this as character building or mental toughening. And perhaps it did those things. But it also broke people. It killed people through accidents, exposure, and cumulative stress on growing bodies. For every ninja who completed training and became skilled operative, there were likely several who didn't make it, who were injured too badly to continue, who couldn't master essential skills, who simply weren't suited for the work. And the ones who did make it, they'd been shaped into something not quite normal anymore. They'd suppressed natural instincts, rewired nervous systems to ignore pain and fear, and internalized worldviews where human life, including their own, had purely instrumental value. They were survivors. They were professionals. They were as prepared as humans could be for deadly work ahead. And still, most wouldn't last long. Because no amount of training can fully prepare you for the moment when you're hiding in an attic, listening to guards search the floor below, knowing that discovery means torture and death. No amount of meditation can eliminate the fear of being alone in enemy territory with no support and no way home if the mission fails. The training created functional operators. It didn't create fearless ones. Fear is biological. The best the training could do was teach you to function despite fear. And that's perhaps the most terrifying part. Ninjas felt everything you'd feel in their situations. They just couldn't afford to let it stop them. Daily life, the unglamorous reality. Strip away the dramatic mission moments, and what was ninja life actually like day to day? Uncomfortable, tedious, and defined by constant low-level stress. Physical environment first. Ninja villages in Iga and Koka weren't exotic fortresses. They were farming, communities indistinguishable from other rural Japanese villages. Houses were simple wooden structures with thatched roofs. Cold in winter, hot in summer. Insects were constant problems. Rats and mice invaded food storage. The smell of human and animal waste permeated everything because proper sanitation didn't exist. The social structure was rigidly hierarchical. At the top were jonin or shonan, clan heads. Some were relatively wealthy, controlling land comparable to minor daimyo. Others were little more than village headmen with modest houses, but all held absolute authority over their clans. Below them came chunin, middle managers who ran clan operations, negotiating contracts, assigning missions, maintaining training programs, handling administration. Chunin were the links between leaders and actual operatives. At the bottom were genin, field agents, the actual ninjas conducting missions. This was the largest group and the most expendable. If a genin succeeded, the clan benefited, and the genin might receive payment. If a genin failed or was captured, the clan denied all knowledge, and the genin faced torture alone. This hierarchy meant the romantic image of independent ninja warriors is largely false. Most ninjas weren't freelancers choosing missions. They were employees, or more accurately, clan assets deployed from above. They had some autonomy in mission execution, but couldn't refuse assignments without becoming Ronin, masterless warriors with extremely limited survival options in Sengoku, Japan. Daily routine when not on missions: mundane agricultural work. Ninjas mostly came from farming families and had to maintain farms to survive. A typical day involved working rice paddies, tending crops, repairing tools, and buildings, all the tasks required for rural households. Training and missions were additions to this work, not replacements. Food was simple and often inadequate. Basic diet: rice, millet, beans, vegetables, with fish or meat as rare luxuries. During lean periods, common in mountainous regions with poor soil, people ate less. Not starvation, but grinding daily insufficiency that sapped strength and made people susceptible to disease. Ninjas supposedly had special mission rations, concentrated foods providing maximum nutrition with minimal weight. Kadayaki hardtack biscuits, dried fruits, nuts, grain mixtures. But these weren't delicacies. They were survival rations designed to keep you functional, not satisfied. Healthcare was primitive. Ninjas knew how to set broken bones, though results were often limbs that never worked quite right. They knew which plants reduced fever or pain, though effectiveness was limited. They knew how to cauterize wounds, though the process was agonizing and often caused more damage than it prevented. Injuries we'd consider minor were career-ending or fatal. A badly sprained ankle healing crooked meant you couldn't run or jump properly, couldn't do ninja work. A deep cut becoming infected meant blood poisoning and death within days. Even tooth decay could cause abscesses that spread infection to jaw or brain. And this brings us to the most overlooked aspect: constant, grinding fear. Not acute fear of immediate danger, though that existed, but chronic anxiety of living in a world where safety was illusion and disaster could strike any time. You feared being identified as ninja because that made you and your family targets. You feared your last mission left clues. Enemies were following. You feared clan leadership would assign missions beyond your capabilities. You feared other ninjas in your own clan might betray you for advancement. You feared that the daimyo employing your clan would decide eliminating your entire village was more convenient than risking your secrets being sold to rivals. The social stigma added another misery layer. Samurai viewed ninjas with contempt, as dishonorable servants doing dirty work for pay. Merchants and farmers viewed them with suspicion, as people involved in violence and deception. Even within ninja communities, there was recognition that what they did violated normal codes of human behavior. This affected personal relationships profoundly. Could ninjas trust anyone outside immediate family? Could they even trust family? Marriages were often arranged for strategic purposes, linking ninja families or creating connections with merchant or samurai families. Genuine emotional intimacy was dangerous because it created vulnerabilities enemies could exploit. If you had children, you knew they'd likely become ninjas too, subjected to the same brutal training, dangers, and fearful existence. You knew odds were good. You'd see children die before you. But what choice did you have? In Sengoku, Japan, people didn't choose children's futures based on preferences or abilities. The psychological stress would be enormous even for people raised in this culture. For modern persons transported to Ninja Village, the weight would be overwhelming. No privacy, no personal space, no escape from clan demands. Your entire life structured around clan needs and profession requirements. The concept of personal identity separate from your role didn't exist. and the periods between missions could last weeks or months. These weren't vacations. They were periods of anxious waiting, knowing next assignment could come anytime and could be anything from simple information gathering to mission with near certain mortality. You couldn't leave village without permission. You couldn't pursue interests outside assigned role. You couldn't fully relax because relaxation meant skills atrophying, and atrophied skills meant death. The economics were brutal too. Ninjas were paid for missions, but payment went to clan leadership, which distributed portions to operatives. A genin successfully completing a difficult mission might receive a share, but never enough to change economic status. They remained poor farmers, supplementing income with occasional, dangerous work. Cost-benefit analysis. Risk your life for payment that might feed your family through winter. Succeed, and you get to do it again. Fail, and you're dead or crippled, and your family loses whatever support you provided. No retirement, no pension, no insurance. If you survived to old age, unlikely, you depended entirely on family's willingness to support you. The material poverty meant doing without countless small comforts we take for granted. No soft beds. You slept on thin mats on wooden floors. No temperature control. Cold in winter, hot in summer. No easy hygiene. Bathing was infrequent and water had to be hauled from wells or streams. No privacy. Multiple generations lived in small houses where everyone heard everything. No entertainment except what you created yourself. Folk songs, simple games, stories around fires. No books except few clan training manuals. No travel except for missions. No variety in food. No ability to escape circumstances through fantasy or imagination, because you needed to stay grounded in reality to survive. The cumulative effect: physical hardship, social isolation, constant fear, lack of autonomy, grinding poverty, knowledge that your life had purely instrumental value to people who discard you without hesitation, would break most modern people within weeks. We're used to basic comforts, some personal freedom, the assumption that our lives have intrinsic value beyond utility to others. Ninjas had none of these things. They endured because endurance was the only option. They survived because the alternative was death, or worse. But we still haven't discussed the actual work, the missions, infiltrations, moments when all that training and endurance were tested against real dangers with real stakes. That's where the romantic vision of ninja collides most violently with historical reality. And that's where you'd fail, because modern people aren't psychologically prepared for the actual work of being a ninja. We'll get to that. But first, you need to understand the tools they actually used versus what Hollywood depicts. Tools and techniques, reality versus fantasy. Almost everything you think you know about ninja weapons is wrong. Let's start with clothing. The iconic all-black ninja outfit is complete fabrication, probably originating from Japanese theater, where stagehands dressed in black to be invisible to audiences. Real ninjas dressed to blend in, wearing whatever was appropriate for their disguise. Farmer disguise meant farmer clothes. Monk disguise meant monk robes. Merchant disguise meant merchant clothing. For nighttime infiltration, where blending wasn't the goal, ninjas preferred dark blue or brown, not black. Why? Pure black actually stands out against most natural backgrounds, especially under moonlight. Dark blue or brown blends better with shadows and natural environments. Weapons next. What ninjas actually carried was mostly ordinary items, explainable if searched. A standard short sword or katana was normal for travelers. Various knives were ubiquitous. The Tanto dagger served multiple purposes: weapon, tool, prying device. Shuriken, throwing stars, are real and ninjas did use them. They came in various forms: flat, star-shaped, Hira shuriken, and straight spike-like bow shuriken being most common. But here's the crucial point. Shuriken were almost never used to kill. They were distraction weapons. If fleeing with pursuers close, you'd throw shuriken behind you to force pursuers to dodge or slow down, buying seconds to escape. If creating confusion, throwing multiple shuriken from hiding could make enemies think they were under larger scale attack. Could shuriken kill? Potentially, with lucky hit to eye, throat, or other vulnerable area. But the idea of ninjas carrying dozens and using them as primary weapons is fantasy. They were heavy, noisy when carried in quantity, and not particularly effective. Most ninjas probably carried just a few, if any. The kusarigama, sickle with chain and weight attached, appears in ninja manuals and was genuinely used, though not exclusively by ninjas. It was versatile. The chain could entangle weapons or limbs. The weight could be swung as bludgeon. The sickle blade could cut, but it was difficult to use effectively, required extensive training to avoid hitting yourself, and was conspicuous to carry. The shinobi gama, a smaller version, was supposedly preferred by ninjas for concealment. Poison gets mentioned frequently with ninjas, and yes, they used poison, but not quite like movies suggest. Ninjas learned to create poisons from plants, minerals, and animal sources, but these were primarily used to coat weapon edges or create incapacitating smoke. Why not poison food? Because accessing someone's kitchen and food supply is extremely difficult in practice, and most available poisons either acted too slowly to be tactically useful or caused symptoms distinctive enough to make poisoning obvious. Now exotic equipment. Ninjas used grappling hooks, the kaginawa, consisting of hook attached to rope, essential for climbing walls or scaling obstacles. But risky because throwing a grappling hook creates noise, and if it doesn't catch on first throw, you've announced your presence to every garden area. They used mizugumo, sometimes translated as water spiders, supposedly devices for walking on water. Reality was less impressive. They were probably rafts or floating devices that might allow crossing a moat, not magical shoes for running across water surface. Disguise kits were essential and often elaborate. A ninja might carry 2 or 3 different outfits, allowing quick identity changes. They'd have props appropriate to whatever role they were playing. Buddhist prayer beads for monk, tools for craftsman, good samples for merchant. They'd carry materials for altering appearance. Charcoal for darkening skin, white powder for appearing aged or ill, materials for creating fake wounds or disabilities. For infiltration missions, ninjas used various special tools, small saws for cutting through wooden walls or floors, picks for opening locks, dark lanterns projecting light in controlled direction without being visible from other angles, listening devices, tubes amplifying sounds through walls, flexible rods for lifting door bars from outside, string and cord for numerous purposes from creating tripwires to measuring distances. They carried survival equipment, flint and steel for starting fires, though they were also trained to create friction fires without tools. Water containers, often bamboo tubes that could double as breathing devices when hiding underwater. Medicine kits containing treatments for common injuries and illness. Emergency rations, hardtack, and concentrated foods that could sustain them if they had to hide for extended periods. The fukiya, or blowgun, was real and genuinely used. Made from bamboo or metal tubing, it could fire small darts with reasonable accuracy at short range. Darts could be poisoned for more effect. The blowgun's advantage was silence. You could incapacitate a guard without alerting others. But it had severe limitations: very short range, poor accuracy beyond a few meters, and even poisoned darts usually weren't instantly incapacitated. Now, explosives and incendiary devices. Yes, ninjas used early forms of explosives, primarily based on gunpowder, which reached Japan from China. They created devices that could start fires, produce smoke, or create loud noises for distraction. Smoke bombs did exist. Crude clay, or paper containers filled with ingredients producing thick smoke when ignited. But they didn't create instant clouds, allowing magical disappearances. They produced gradually building smoke that could cover a retreat if you'd already started running. Ninjas also used mundane sabotage tools, materials for starting fires in enemy supply depots, poisons for contaminating wells, rarely effective given dilution factor, caltrops, makibishi, small metal devices with points that would injure feet or horse hooves when scattered on roads. The techniques ninjas actually employed were similarly unglamorous. Infiltration wasn't usually scaling walls and sneaking past dozens of guards. It was more often finding legitimate access, bribing a guard, posing as delivery person, waiting for festival or other distraction, or simply walking in through an unguarded entrance while dressed appropriately. Intelligence gathering was mostly patient observation and social engineering, not dramatic eavesdropping on secret meetings. A ninja might pose as merchant and spend weeks in enemy town, slowly gathering information through casual conversations, observing troop movements, noting which officials seemed important. The work was tedious, required excellent memory and attention to detail, and offered few dramatic moments. When ninjas did conduct high-risk operations, sneaking into castle, stealing documents, eliminating specific target, techniques emphasized patience and caution over daring. You'd spend days or weeks observing targets' routines, noting patterns, identifying vulnerabilities. You'd move slowly, testing each step before committing weight. You'd retreat and try again another day, rather than push forward when conditions weren't ideal. The famous ninja ability to move silently was real, but achieved through mundane means. Soft-soled footwear, or bare feet, careful placement of each step, slow, deliberate movements that didn't create air currents or vibrations. It required years of practice and constant attention, but it wasn't supernatural. What's striking about actual tools and techniques is how practical and unglamorous they were. Ninjas weren't equipped with exotic secret weapons or trained in mysterious hidden arts. They were professionals who understood their trade, practiced skills obsessively, and used whatever actually worked rather than what looked impressive. The myth-making came later, during peaceful Edo period, when ninjas were fading into obscurity, and people who'd never met real ninjas began writing stories. Each generation added new elements, exaggerated existing ones, and gradually transformed practical tools of brutal trade into magical implements of mysterious warriors. Understanding real tools and techniques makes ninja achievement more impressive, not less. These weren't superheroes with magical powers. They were humans who trained themselves to perform difficult tasks with unreliable tools under terrible conditions. That they accomplished what they did using such modest means speaks to their skill, determination, and willingness to endure hardship that would defeat most people. But it also underscores just how difficult and dangerous their work actually was. Without magical smoke bombs or supernatural abilities, every mission was desperate gamble against terrible odds. Without exotic weapons, they had to rely on skill and luck. Without protection of powerful patrons, they operated alone in hostile territory where everyone was potential enemy. The reality was harder than the myth, always. Now let's talk about what that reality actually looked like during missions, because this is where you'd fail completely. Missions. Professional death gambling. The work itself, the actual missions ninjas conducted, bears almost no resemblance to popular depictions. And here's the reveal that changes everything. Ninjas weren't primarily assassins. They were intelligence gatherers, spies. Most of their work was slow, tedious, dangerous, and required skills having nothing to do with martial prowess. Let's walk through how a typical mission actually worked. A daimyo hires your clan to gather intelligence on arrival. The jonin assigns you the mission. You're given minimal information, the target's location, what information is needed, deadline. How you accomplish the mission is your problem. You might receive special equipment if available and appropriate, but more likely you'll have to acquire or create what you need. First task, planning. You need to understand target area's geography, local political situation, who the important people are, and what cover story will allow you to operate without suspicion. This requires research, which in pre-modern Japan meant talking to merchants who'd traveled through area, consulting what limited maps existed, and hoping your information was current and accurate. Then you travel to target area, which itself is dangerous. Roads between provinces in Sengoku, Japan were patrolled. Bandits were common. Travelers needed documents proving legitimate business. You'd need cover identity explaining your presence and wouldn't immediately attract suspicion. Once you reach target area, real work begins. If your mission is learning about enemy daimyo's military strength, you might spend weeks posing as itinerant merchant, slowly gathering information fragments. You'd observe troop movements, note which roads supply wagons use, count guards at checkpoints. You'd strike up conversations with locals, carefully steering discussions to learn about daimyo's policies, recent battles, rumors of alliances or conflicts. Every conversation is risk. Say wrong thing, show too much interest in sensitive topics, fail to know something your cover identity should know, and you create suspicion. Get caught in lie once and your cover is blown. And if your cover is blown in enemy territory, you're alone with no support and no legitimate explanation. Patient, methodical intelligence gathering could last for months. You'd establish patterns, create routines making locals comfortable with your presence. You'd gradually develop relationships that might provide access to better information, all while living in constant low-level fear that someone would realize what you were actually doing. Some missions required active infiltration, getting inside castle or fortified compound to observe defenses, steal documents, or gather information about inhabitants. This is the mission type popular culture loves, and it was every bit as dangerous as depicted, but not at all how depicted. Castles and fortified compounds in Sengoku, Japan were specifically designed to prevent infiltration. High walls with limited entry points, all guarded and monitored. Multiple defensive layers, so even if you breached outer wall, you'd face inner defenses. Often had nightingale floors, wooden floors deliberately designed to squeak when walked on, making silent movement nearly impossible. Guard dogs, regular patrols, and most importantly, people actively paranoid about infiltration, because this was Sengoku period, and everyone was constantly plotting. So how would ninja actually infiltrate? Rarely by scaling walls at midnight, despite what movies show. More often by finding legitimate way in, bribing a guard, impersonating servant, or delivery person, or waiting for festival or other event, bringing large numbers of people into compound. You'd do reconnaissance first, observing routines, noting which guards seemed less vigilant, identifying potential entry points. If you did have to go over a wall, you'd choose time carefully. Likely not during dark of night when guards were most alert for infiltrators, but during twilight when visibility was poor but suspicious activity was less expected. You'd use whatever climbing aids you could improvise or carry. And you'd move slowly, testing each handhold and foothold, because fall meant injury, capture, or death. Once inside, you faced maze of corridors, rooms, obstacles. You couldn't ask directions. You couldn't explain presence if discovered. Every corner might reveal guard, servant, or the person you were supposed to be spying on. The stress of operating in this environment is difficult to overstate. Heart pounding, breathing rapid, senses hyper alert for any sign of discovery. If mission required stealing documents, you'd need to find where they were kept, which might take hours of searching, without making noise, leaving evidence of presence, or being discovered. If documents were in locked box, you'd need to open it without leaving obvious signs of tampering. You'd need to read or memorize information in dim light, possibly while fighting fatigue and fear. Then return everything exactly as found and get out without detection. Sabotage missions, appearing in historical records, usually involved fire. Starting fires in enemy supply depots, arsenals, or even castles was primary ninja tactic because fire creates chaos, destroys resources, and is difficult to stop once started. But setting fire that will actually accomplish something requires planning. You need to understand how buildings are constructed, what materials burn well, how to create fire that will spread before being discovered. And you need to do this, knowing that if you're caught in act, you won't just be killed. You'll be tortured for information first. Assassination missions were actually relatively rare for ninjas, despite popular depictions. Why? Because assassination is extremely difficult, extremely high risk, and often strategically counterproductive. Killing enemy daimyo might just elevate more competent successor. It might create power vacuum, making situation more chaotic and unpredictable. And it almost certainly results in massive retaliation as enemy tries to identify and punish whoever was responsible. When ninjas did conduct assassinations, they were usually opportunistic rather than elaborately planned. If intelligence gathering revealed that target had vulnerable routines or moments of exposure, that information might be used. But the idea of ninjas sneaking into bedrooms to kill sleeping targets is mostly fiction. People important enough to be assassination targets slept in guarded chambers with multiple security layers. The stress of these missions was cumulative and devastating. You'd spend weeks or months on edge, constantly alert for threats, unable to fully relax, even when alone. Sleep would be fitful and insufficient. You'd be eating poorly, often going hungry because your cover identity had limited resources. You'd be isolated, unable to trust anyone, unable to share fears or doubts. And then the journey home, just as dangerous as mission itself. If your infiltration had been discovered, even if you escaped, enemies would be searching for you. You'd need to vary route, avoid obvious roads, stay constantly alert for pursuit. You'd be carrying whatever intelligence you'd gathered, which made you high-value target if enemies suspected you had information. If you made it back to Iga or Koka alive, you'd report to clan leadership, providing whatever information you'd gathered. You'd receive payment, or more likely, your clan would receive payment, and you'd receive portion. You'd get some rest, knowing next mission could come anytime and might be even more dangerous. The psychological toll of this lifestyle would be enormous. Modern soldiers and intelligence operatives working in hostile territory have extensive support systems, regular communication with handlers, psychological screening and support, certainty that if captured, their government will acknowledge them and work for release. Ninjas had none of this. They operated alone, were disavowed if captured, and had no support system beyond immediate clan. The suicide rate among ninjas isn't recorded in historical sources, but it's hard to imagine it wasn't significant. The combination of constant stress, social isolation, moral compromise, and knowledge that you were seen as disposable tool would destroy mental health of anyone subjected to it for extended periods. Some missions ended in failure and capture. What happened then? Torture, interrogation. The enemy would want to know who hired you, what you learned, what your techniques were, who else in their territory might be working for your employers. The torture methods available in Sengoku, Japan were extensive and horrific, and they'd be applied without hesitation to captured ninja. If you talked, you betrayed your clan and employer, which meant your family would pay price. If you didn't talk, torture would continue until you died. No good option. Best you could hope for was resist long enough that whatever information you had became obsolete, then die before revealing anything critical. Some ninjas carried fast-acting poisons for this scenario. Final escape when capture was certain. Whether many actually used them is unknown, because by definition, we mostly only hear about ninjas who were captured and interrogated, not ones who successfully killed themselves first. Here's the final reveal about ninja missions. They weren't about skill or courage. They were about whether you could function despite damage. The training, the missions, the entire lifestyle systematically damaged you, physically, psychologically, morally. And the ones who survived longest weren't the most skilled. They were the ones whose damage had taken forms that were functional for this work, but would make them completely unsuited for normal life. You wouldn't last a day because you're not damaged in the right ways. Your psychological wiring is suited for modern life, and that makes you catastrophically unsuited for theirs. The Great Clans, Geography of Shadow. The story of ninja cannot be separated from two specific regions, Iga Province and Koka District. These weren't just places ninjas happened to live. They were crucibles that created ninja profession, shaped its development, and ultimately witnessed its destruction. Iga, in modern Mie Prefecture, was a landlocked basin surrounded by mountains. Koka, in modern Shiga Prefecture, was similarly mountainous and isolated. This geography was crucial. Flat, fertile plains supported large populations and powerful daimyo commanding substantial armies. Mountainous regions like Iga and Koka were poor, soil less fertile, transportation difficult, terrain impractical for large-scale agriculture. They couldn't support concentrated political power like richer provinces. But poverty and isolation provided protection. Invading Iga or Koka required marching armies through mountain passes where defenders had enormous advantages. Supply lines would be long and vulnerable. Locals knew every path, cave, and defensible position. And since these regions weren't particularly valuable in resources or tax revenue, most daimyo considered them not worth conquest cost. This created unique political situation. While most of Japan was organized under specific daimyo control, Iga and Koka developed as confederations of small clans. These jizumarai, elite peasant warriors, formed mutual defense leagues called Iki. Roughly equal in power, they governed through consensus rather than hierarchy. The population included higher than normal proportion of people who'd fled from other areas. Defeated samurai, who'd lost lords but refused ritual suicide. Religious dissidents escaping persecution. Criminals avoiding justice. Peasants fleeing oppression or famine. This created communities with less rigid class structure and fewer loyalties to existing feudal order. These factors, isolation, independence, mixed population, weak central authority, created conditions where unconventional warfare techniques could develop. Conventional samurai warfare emphasized status, honor, and clearly defined rules. Mountain communities couldn't compete on those terms, so they developed alternatives. Stealth, deception, intelligence gathering, sabotage. By mid-16th century, ninja clans of Iga and Koka were well established. They developed sophisticated training methods, passed through families, compiled written manuals, and created complex organizational structures. They operated as industry, hiring out services to highest bidder. But their success contained seeds of destruction. As individual daimyo began consolidating power, moving from provincial warlords toward control of larger regions, autonomous territories became unacceptable. The great unifiers who eventually brought Sengoku Japan under centralized control, Oda Nobunaga, Toyotomi Hideyoshi, Tokugawa Ieyasu, couldn't tolerate independent armed regions within what they considered their domains. For Iga and Koka, this became existential crisis. In 1579, Oda Nobunaga's son, Oda Nobukatsu, led force of about 10,000 samurai to invade Iga. Despite being vastly outnumbered, Iga defenders used terrain knowledge, guerrilla tactics, and desperation to inflict devastating defeat. Nobukatsu was humiliated, and his invasion force scattered. This victory sealed Iga's fate. Nobunaga, Japan's most powerful warlord, and a man known for ruthlessness, could not allow such defeat to stand. In 1581, he personally led massive force, estimated at 40,000, to 50,000 warriors in systematic conquest of Iga. This time, no clever tactic or guerrilla warfare could overcome such overwhelming force. The conquest of Iga was brutal. Nobunaga employed scorched earth tactics, burning villages and killing civilians to eliminate any possibility of resistance. Survivors fled to mountains or to other provinces. Ninja clans of Iga were effectively destroyed as organized force. Some individual ninjas escaped and found service with other daimyo, but Iga as autonomous ninja stronghold ceased to exist. Koka's fate was somewhat different. Located in different province, it wasn't directly targeted by Nobunaga with same intensity. But as centralization progressed, Koka also came under control of larger powers. Many Koka ninjas, recognizing which way wind was blowing, made deals with emerging powers. Some found service with Tokugawa Ieyasu, who recognized value of their skills even as he worked to bring Japan under unified control. The fall of Iga and transformation of Koka marked beginning of end for ninja as profession. Without autonomous bases of operation, ninjas became entirely dependent on whoever would hire them. They lost political independence that had allowed them to negotiate as equals with daimyo. They became employees rather than contractors, servants rather than mercenaries. Survivors scattered. Some found employment with Tokugawa family and other daimyo who valued their skills. Hattori Hanzo, most famous ninja in history, was one of these. He became retainer of Tokugawa Ieyasu and led group of Iga refugees, providing intelligence and security services. Other ninjas became ronin, masterless warriors with uncertain futures. Some probably tried to return to farming, though they'd have carried stigma of their ninja past. The destruction of Iga illustrates brutal truth about ninjas. They existed in cracks of feudal system, and when those cracks closed, they were crushed. They weren't powerful warriors who could defeat armies. They were specialists whose skills were valuable only so long as political situation remained fragmented and chaotic. When order was imposed, when centralized power emerged, their utility diminished, and their independence became liability. Here's what's often missed. The fall of Iga wasn't just military defeat. It was cultural genocide. The systematic destruction wasn't designed merely to eliminate military threat. It was designed to erase ninja culture completely. Nobunaga understood that as long as Iga existed as autonomous ninja stronghold, it would remain source of opposition and chaos. This transformation from independent operators to dependent employees also changed nature of ninja work. Under Tokugawa shogunate, which unified Japan and imposed strict social order, ninjas were primarily used for internal surveillance, watching daimyo themselves to ensure they weren't plotting rebellion, gathering intelligence on potential threats to shogunate, and providing security for important officials. This was different from Sengoku period work. Instead of operating in enemy territory among constantly shifting allegiances, they were operating within nominally unified state with clear hierarchies and established rules. Instead of conducting sabotage and guerrilla warfare, they were gathering intelligence through observation and infiltration of ostensibly friendly domains. The work was still dangerous, but nature of danger had changed. The economic situation also deteriorated. With only one major employer, Tokugawa shogunate, ninjas lost ability to negotiate between competing offers. Shogunate paid them whatever it wanted to pay, and they had little recourse. Some ninja families managed to secure relatively stable positions as guards or retainers, but they'd traded independence for security. And many probably questioned whether trade was worth it. The destruction of Iga and transformation of Koka demonstrate that ninjas weren't immortal shadows beyond historical forces. They were humans caught up in violent transformation of Japanese society. And when history rolled over them, they died or scattered like everyone else touched by that transformation. For modern person trying to imagine surviving as ninja, understanding Iga and Koka is crucial. Ninjas didn't emerge from nowhere as mysterious shadow warriors. They were products of specific geographic and political circumstances. When those circumstances changed, when political landscape that created them shifted, they disappeared. You wouldn't just be trying to survive as individual ninja. You'd be trying to survive in specific historical context, as part of specific communities, navigating specific political dynamics. And when ground shifted beneath you, when your entire way of life was targeted for elimination by most powerful military force in Japan, you'd face choice every Iga and Koka ninja faced. Flee, submit, or die. Most chose to flee. It was probably smart choice, but it meant abandoning everything. Your home, your community, infrastructure that had supported your profession. You'd become refugee with specialized skills that were becoming less valuable every year as Japan moved towards centralized peace. The fall of Iga and transformation of Koga demonstrate that ninjas weren't superhuman. They were very human. And humanity is always vulnerable to forces beyond individual control. Famous figures: Hattori Hanzo and the truth among ninjas who emerged from Sengoku period. One name towers above all others: Hattori Hanzo. His story has been told and retold so many times, embroidered with so many legends, that separating fact from fiction requires careful attention to primary sources. But even stripped of supernatural elements, Hanzo's historical life reveals figure remarkable without embellishment. And his story contains revelation that changes how we understand ninja profession. Hattori Hanzo, more specifically Hattori Masanari, the second man to bear name Hattori Hanzo, was born around 1542 in Iga province. The name Hattori Hanzo was actually title passed down through leaders of Hattori family, explaining why historical sources sometimes seem confused about whether there were multiple Hanzos or just one. There were at least 5 men who bore name at various times, but the one we remember was second Hanzo, who served Tokugawa Ieyasu. The Hattori family was part of Iga's ninja community, but also maintained connections to samurai class. This dual status, neither fully ninja nor fully samurai, positioned them uniquely in complex social hierarchy of Sengoku Japan. Young Hanzo received both ninja training and samurai education, learning unconventional warfare alongside orthodox military tactics. According to tradition, and this is where we should note that traditions written down long after events may contain embellishments, Hanzo began formal training at age 8, and by 12 was considered full-fledged ninja. By 18, he'd earned recognition as master. Whether these specific ages are accurate is uncertain, but they're consistent with what we know about ninja training timelines. What's certain is that Hanzo demonstrated exceptional ability early and quickly gained attention of Matsudaira family, who would become Tokugawa. His first recorded military action came at age 16 in 1557, when he participated in night attack on Udo Castle. This established his reputation for daring and effective tactical thinking. Throughout youth and early adulthood, he fought in numerous battles on behalf of Tokugawa Ieyasu. His combat record is impressive, even by samurai standards. Battle of Anagawa in 1570, Battle of Mikitagahara in 1572. Both major engagements where Tokugawa forces faced significantly larger enemy armies. At Mikitagahara, Tokugawa's army was badly defeated by Takeda Shingen's forces. In confusion of retreat, Hanzo, according to contemporary accounts, orchestrated night raid that threw pursuing forces into chaos and allowed Tokugawa army to escape destruction. But the most famous Hattori Hanzo story, the one that cemented his legendary status, occurred in 1582, when Oda Nobunaga was betrayed and killed by his vassal Akechi Mitsuhide in Honnoji incident. Tokugawa Ieyasu was in Osaka, far from home territory and surrounded by potential enemies. With Nobunaga dead and confusion spreading across Japan, Ieyasu's position was extremely vulnerable. He needed to reach his home province of Mikawa quickly, before Mitsuhide or other enemies could move against him. Most direct route was too dangerous. filled with hostile forces and masterless samurai turned bandits who would happily kill or ransom important daimyo. Hanzo suggested alternate route through Iga province, using his connections to ninja clans there. Despite Iga having been conquered by Nobunaga just a year earlier, Hanzo believed refugees from that conquest who'd settled in Mikawa, and who owed Tokugawa for providing sanctuary, could be mobilized to help. He was right. Hanzo assembled somewhere between 200 and 300 Iga and Koga ninjas, who guided Tokugawa through mountain paths, dealt with bandits and hostile forces, and successfully delivered him to safety. This journey, known as Iga Go or Iga Crossing, was extremely dangerous. Contemporary records indicate that about 200 of Tokugawa's retainers were killed or wounded during crossing by bandits practicing ochamushigari, hunting defeated warriors for equipment and valuables. Tokugawa never forgot this service. When he eventually unified Japan and became shogun, he rewarded Hanzo and Iga and Koga ninjas who'd aided him with positions, land, and income. Hanzo himself received substantial territories and became commander of unit of Iga and Koga warriors, serving as guards for Edo Castle, Shogun's headquarters. There's a famous gate in Tokyo still called Hanzo-mon, Hanzo's Gate, marking where his residence once stood. The entire neighborhood was once called Iga-cho, Iga Town, because of Iga ninja families settled there. Another famous Hanzo story concerns Tokugawa Ieyasu's eldest son, Matsudera Nobuyasu. In 1579, Nobuyasu was accused of conspiring against Oda Nobunaga. Whether accusation was true remains debated, but Nobunaga demanded Nobuyasu commit seppuku, ritual suicide, and Ieyasu, dependent on Nobunaga's support, had no choice but to order his own son's death. According to legend, and here we should note this is legend, recorded long after events, Hanzo was designated as Nobuyasu's Keishakunin, the second who assists in seppuku by beheading person to end suffering if initial cut is unsuccessful. But Hanzo, who'd served Nobuyasu and held him in high regard, couldn't bring himself to raise sword against his lord's son. He refused assignment, weeping openly. Ieyasu reportedly said afterward, "Even a demon can shed tears," referring to Hanzo's nickname, Oni no Hanzo, Demon Hanzo. Whether this story is completely accurate or embellished, it reveals something important. Hanzo's reputation was fierce enough that his nickname compared him to demon, yet he was still recognized as having human emotions and loyalties. Hanzo's later years are less well documented. He served Ieyasu in various capacities, commanded troops in several campaigns including Siege of Odawara in 1590, and managed intelligence network that Ieyasu used to maintain control over potentially rebellious daimyo. He died on January 2nd, 1597, though some sources say late 1596 due to calendar conversion issues, about 7 years before Ieyasu became shogun. His death was recorded as being from illness. His funeral was held at Seinenji Temple in what is now Tokyo, and his grave remains there today. After his death, Hanzo's son and successor took name Hattori Hanzo, continuing family tradition. This third Hanzo served as captain of castle guard, but reportedly lacked his father's abilities. He faced rebellion by his own guards, who found him difficult to serve under. Hattori family's prominence declined, though they remained part of Tokugawa administration. But what about other famous ninjas? Historical record is much sparser. Fujibayashi Yasutake was compiler of Bansen Shukai, most comprehensive ninja manual to survive. This automatically makes him significant, as he preserved knowledge that would otherwise have been lost. Bansen Shukai was compiled in 1676, well after Golden Age of ninjas had passed, suggesting Fujibayashi recognized profession was dying and wanted to preserve its techniques and philosophy. Momochi Sandayu was reportedly one of 3 leading ninja families in Iga before its conquest. Little reliable historical information about him exists, and many stories attributed to him are probably legends. but Momochi's name appears in enough historical documents to suggest family was real and significant within Iga's ninja community. Fuma Kotaro was supposedly leader of Fuma Ninja Clan, based in Kanto region. Historical sources confirm someone with this name existed and served Hojo clan, conducting guerrilla warfare and intelligence operations. But many stories about him, like tales of him being 7 feet tall or commanding groups of bandits, are almost certainly exaggerated or invented. Mochizuki Chiyome is often described as kunoichi, female ninja, who ran network of female spies during Sengoku period. She supposedly recruited orphaned girls, trained them in espionage, and deployed them as infiltrators. Problem is that solid historical evidence for her existence is limited. She appears in some historical texts, but with little detail, and many specific stories about her come from much later sources that mixed fact with fiction. This raises an important point about female ninjas generally. Term kunoichi appears in Bansen Shukai, but not as word for female ninja. It describes technique called kunoichi no jutsu, basically using women to gather intelligence by getting close to male targets. Whether women from ninja families received same comprehensive training as men is unclear and probably varied between families. Some women certainly participated in ninja activities, wives or daughters of ninja men who assisted with intelligence gathering or provided support. But image of kunoichi as female ninja warriors equal to male counterparts is probably more fiction than fact, emerging from later romanticization rather than historical reality. What's striking about even most famous historical ninjas is how little reliable information survives about them. We have more detailed records about Hattori Hanzo than any other ninja, and even his story has been so mythologized that separating fact from legend requires careful source analysis. This absence of detailed records isn't surprising. Ninjas operated in secret. Their effectiveness depended on anonymity. Their employers wanted deniability. Ninjas themselves had no incentive to create detailed records that might be used against them. The mythologization process began almost immediately. During Edo period, when ninjas were transitioning from active operatives to legends, storytellers began creating elaborate tales about ninja heroes. These stories emphasized supernatural abilities, exotic weapons, and dramatic confrontations that had little basis in reality. Modern media has accelerated this process. Hattori Hanzo in Kill Bill bears no resemblance to historical figure. Ninjas in video games, comics, and movies are almost pure fantasy. For someone trying to understand what it would actually be like to be ninja, this mythologization is deeply unhelpful. It creates expectations about abilities, equipment, and lifestyle that have nothing to do with historical reality. Real Hattori Hanzo wasn't mystical warrior with supernatural powers. He was highly skilled, well-trained professional who operated in extremely dangerous environment and survived through competence, loyalty, and probably significant luck. Understanding real famous ninjas, or what little we can know about them, provides more grounded perspective on profession. These weren't superhuman beings beyond normal limitations. They were highly skilled professionals, operating under terrible constraints, surviving through competence and loyalty, serving masters who valued their utility, but not their humanity. They deserve to be remembered for what they actually were and did, not for supernatural legends that obscured their genuine achievements. Real story is remarkable enough. The decline, when peace became the deadliest enemy. The death of ninja as profession didn't happen suddenly. It was gradual fading. Transformation from active operatives to obsolete specialists to legendary figures to pure myth. Understanding this decline reveals truths about ninja profession that myths obscure. The beginning of end came with unification of Japan. 3 great unifiers, Oda Nobunaga, Toyotomi Hideyoshi, Tokugawa Ieyasu, worked across several decades to bring Japan's warring provinces under centralized control. Nobunaga began process through military conquest and ruthless suppression of rivals. Hideyoshi continued after Nobunaga's death in 1582. Ieyasu completed it after Hideyoshi's death in 1598, culminating in his victory at Battle of Sekigahara in 1600, and his appointment as shogun in 1603. This unification fundamentally changed political landscape that had created need for ninjas. Sengoku period's chaos, dozens of daimyo constantly plotting, shifting alliances, continuous warfare, had made intelligence gathering and clandestine operations essential. But as power concentrated, as warfare gave way to bureaucratic control, as Tokugawa shogunate imposed strict social order, demand for ninja services collapsed. Here's the cruel irony. Tokugawa Ieyasu owed his life to ninjas. Hattori Hanzo and Iga refugees who'd guided him to safety in 1582. He recognized their value and employed them throughout his rise to power. But once he'd achieved that power, once he'd established Tokugawa shogunate that would rule Japan for next 265 years, the very political stability he created eliminated most circumstances that made ninjas necessary. Tokugawa period, 1603 to 1868, is often called Edo period after city where shogunate was based. It was characterized by relative peace, strict social hierarchy, and isolation from foreign influence. Rigid class system placed samurai at top, followed by farmers, artisans, and merchants. Everyone had defined place and role. Social mobility was severely limited. Shogunate maintained control through combination of military force, bureaucratic administration, and system called Senkin-kotai, requiring daimyo to spend alternating years in Edo under shogun's watch. In this new order, what role was there for ninjas? They couldn't operate as independent mercenaries. Shogunate wouldn't tolerate autonomous armed groups. They couldn't sell services to competing daimyo because daimyo were now firmly under shogunate control. The kind of intelligence work that had been their primary function was now less necessary because shogunate had developed its own intelligence apparatus. Some ninjas found employment with Tokugawa government. Hattori Hanzo's Iga and Koga warriors became guards for Edo Castle and conducted occasional intelligence operations on shogunate's behalf. But these were essentially government employees, not independent operators. They had steady employment and relative security, but they'd traded autonomy for it. Other ninjas found work with individual daimyo as guards, bodyguards, or minor administrators. But again, this was employee status, not professional contractor status. And as Edo period progressed and peace became normalized, even these positions became less common. Shogunate did maintain some use for ninja skills. They employed onmitsu, secret investigators who traveled incognito to monitor daimyo compliance with shogunate regulations, watch, for signs of rebellion or conspiracy, and report back to Edo. This was genuine intelligence work, but different from Sengoku period ninja operations. Onmitsu were government officials conducting surveillance within established state structure, not operatives working in enemy territory during wartime. As need for active ninja work declined, so did training. Families that had maintained strict training regimens for generations began to relax them. Why subject children to brutal conditioning for a profession that barely existed? Why preserve secret techniques when there was no opportunity to use them? This is when ninja manuals were compiled. Bansen Shukai in 1676, Shoninki in 1681, and other texts were written during this period by people who recognized ninja knowledge was disappearing. They were trying to preserve information that would otherwise be lost. Fact that these manuals exist is evidence profession was already in terminal decline. If ninja work was still thriving, there'd be less need to write everything down. Psychological and cultural changes of Edo period also worked against ninja mindset. Sengoku period had rewarded ruthless pragmatism, tactical flexibility, willingness to violate honor codes to achieve objectives. Edo period increasingly emphasized rigid adherence to social norms, respect for hierarchy, Confucian ethical principles. Skills and attitudes that made someone effective ninja were increasingly seen as dishonorable or even criminal. Few remaining ninjas became social anomalies, people practicing profession the new era had no place for. Some probably tried to pass skills to younger generations, hoping demand would return. Others likely recognized futility and advised children to pursue different careers. Still others may have maintained forms of ninja training, while substance gradually eroded, creating martial art for its own sake rather than practical preparation for covert operations. There's poignant element to this decline. Ninjas had survived by being adaptable, learning whatever skills were necessary for survival in chaotic environment. But they couldn't adapt to irrelevance. They couldn't transform themselves into something peaceful era needed, because whole point of their profession was operating in chaos and violence. By mid-18th century, actual ninja work had largely ceased. Few remaining practitioners were either very old men remembering their youth, or younger people who'd learned techniques from elders but never used them professionally. Ninja was becoming figure of past, and that's when mythologization accelerated. During Edo period, popular entertainment flourished. Kabuki theater, woodblock prints, and serialized fiction all grew in popularity, and these entertainment forms loved ninjas. They took fragmentary historical knowledge, added liberal doses of imagination, and created ninja of legend, mysterious warriors in black clothing who could turn invisible, walk on water, perform superhuman feats. This fictional ninja was far more interesting than real thing. Real ninjas were pragmatic mercenaries who spent most time gathering intelligence through mundane means. Fictional ninjas were magical warriors having exotic adventures. Real ninja work was mostly boring and occasionally terrifying. Fictional ninja stories were exciting from beginning to end. Public preferred fiction, and gradually fiction became what everyone knew about ninjas. This process continued into 20th century and exploded in late 20th and early 21st centuries as ninja characters spread through global popular culture. Movies, television, comics, anime, video games, each medium added new layers to mythology, moving further from historical reality. Irony is that this mythologization happened precisely because real ninjas had disappeared. If ninjas were still active, still conducting operations, still maintaining strict secrecy, stories couldn't have flourished. But once they were safely in past, once they'd become historical curiosities, storytellers could shape them however they wanted. For last actual ninjas, ones who lived into Edo period and beyond, this transformation must have been strange. To have practiced brutal, dangerous professions and then watch it romanticized into something unrecognizable. To have your actual skills, patient observation, social engineering, endurance of hardship, ignored in favor of supernatural abilities you never possessed. To become legend while still alive, but have legend bear no resemblance to your life. Last direct links to historical ninja practice died in early 20th century. Fujita Seiko, who claimed to be 14th generation master of Koga ninjutsu, died in 1966. Whether his lineage claims were completely accurate is debated, but he did teach at Japanese military espionage institutes and preserved some historical knowledge. With his death, even tenuous connection to actual ninja practice effectively ended. What remains are stories, myths, global pop culture phenomenon. And what's lost is historical reality. Brutal training, unglamorous work, constant fear, social marginalization, ultimately futile attempt to survive in profession that history was making obsolete. Ninjas didn't disappear because they were defeated militarily. They disappeared because world changed in ways that made them unnecessary. Their skills became irrelevant. Their services found no buyers. Their culture and knowledge base eroded through lack of use. They faded not with dramatic final battle, but through quieter tragedy of becoming obsolete. Why you wouldn't last. The brutal calculation. Let's be brutally honest about what it would mean for a modern person to become ninja in feudal Japan. Not sanitized, romanticized version. Actual reality of that life. Start with physical demands, which would break most of us immediately. Modern people, even those who exercise regularly, aren't conditioned for sustained physical hardship that was baseline normal in feudal Japan. Our food is abundant and calorie-rich. Our lives involve minimal physical labor for most people. We sleep on comfortable beds in temperature-controlled environments. We have shoes designed to cushion impact. We don't walk or run long distances regularly. Ninja's daily physical reality would be overwhelming. Standing in cold water for hours is training. Running potentially 200 kilometers in a day. Hanging motionless from tree branches or rafters for extended periods. Climbing walls and cliffs without modern climbing equipment. Swimming in armor. Moving silently for hours while muscles scream in protest. These weren't occasional exceptional demands. They were regular requirements. Your body isn't prepared, even if you're fit by modern standards. You're fit for modern activities. Your cardiovascular system is trained for gym workouts or recreational sports, not for all-day physical labor punctuated by bursts of maximal exertion. Your muscles are conditioned for controlled movements in safe environments, not for hanging from precarious positions or climbing rough surfaces. Your joints and connective tissues haven't adapted to constant low-level stress. Within days, probably hours, you'd be dealing with injuries that would cascade into bigger problems. Blisters on feet from walking in period-appropriate footwear. Muscle strains from movements your body isn't prepared for. Joint pain from stress positions. And here's critical issue. There's no physical therapy, no anti-inflammatory medication, no ice packs, no rest period where someone covers your duties while you recover. You either function through pain or you fail. Dietary shock would be immediate and devastating. Modern people, even those who eat poorly by contemporary standards, consume far more calories and far more dietary variety than feudal Japanese peasants. Ninja diet was rice, millet, beans, seasonal vegetables, occasionally small amounts of fish or meat. That's it. No dairy. No sugar except occasional honey or fruit. No spices except salt and perhaps some local herbs. No snacking between meals. Often not enough food even at meals. Your body would go into calorie deficit almost immediately. You'd be burning thousands of calories per day through physical labor and training, but consuming maybe 1,500 to 2,000 calories maximum. You'd lose weight rapidly. Fat first, then muscle. Your strength would decline. Your recovery from exertion would slow. Your immune system would weaken, making you vulnerable to countless diseases and infections. And hunger, constant, gnawing hunger. Not hunger of skipping meal, but deeper hunger of sustained caloric deficit. It affects everything: mood, concentration, decision-making, sleep. You'd become obsessed with food, thinking about it constantly, dreaming about meals you used to take for granted. But physical hardship is only part of the problem. Psychological demands would destroy most modern people faster than physical ones. Start with fear. Real, immediate, rational fear for your life. Not abstract anxiety about future possibilities, but concrete knowledge that next mission might result in torture and death. That family you're spying on could discover you at any moment. That castle you're infiltrating has guards specifically trained to watch for people like you. That one mistake, one slip, one moment of inattention could end your life in most painful way possible. Modern people aren't psychologically prepared for sustained fear. We've been raised in societies where physical safety is mostly guaranteed. We have police, laws, courts, hospitals. We have support systems. We have expectation that if we're in danger, help will come. Ninjas had none of this. They operated alone in hostile territory, where everyone was potential enemy and discovery meant death. Constant stress would rewire your brain in ways making normal emotional life impossible. You'd develop hypervigilance, constantly scanning for threats, unable to relax, even in supposedly safe situations. You'd have nightmares. You'd struggle with emotional regulation. You'd find it increasingly difficult to trust anyone or form genuine emotional connections because everyone could be a potential threat. Moral weight would be equally crushing. Ninjas did things that violate most people's ethical frameworks. They deceived people who trusted them. They stole. They occasionally killed. They used tactics conventional warriors considered dishonorable. And they did these things not in heat of battle, where moral reasoning shuts down, but deliberately, coldly, as professional requirements. Modern people raised in societies emphasizing individual rights, ethical behavior, and intrinsic value of human life aren't prepared for this kind of moral compromise. Even those who say they could do whatever necessary to survive usually haven't tested that belief against reality. Psychological cost of systematic deception, manipulation, and occasional violence would accumulate over time, creating guilt, shame, and self-loathing that would be difficult to manage. Social isolation would compound all of this. You couldn't tell anyone what you actually did. You couldn't share fears or doubts with people outside ninja community. And even within community, trust was limited. You couldn't form normal romantic relationships because you couldn't be honest about who you were and what you did. You couldn't make friends in normal sense because friendship requires openness and vulnerability too dangerous for ninja to risk. You'd be profoundly alone, even when surrounded by people. Alone with your fears, memories of what you'd done, knowledge of what you might have to do next. Psychological research on isolation suggests humans are fundamentally social creatures, needing emotional connection to maintain mental health. Extended isolation creates depression, anxiety, cognitive decline, even physical health problems. And ninja life was isolation by design, enforced by requirements of operational security. Lack of modern comforts would grind you down in ways that seem trivial, but accumulate into serious quality of life issues. No hot showers, no comfortable beds, no climate control, no privacy, no entertainment beyond what you could create yourself, no escape from circumstances, even temporarily, no books, music, games, or media to distract you from grimness of existence. Medical situation would be terrifying. Every minor illness we treat casually could kill you. Infected tooth could lead to abscess spreading to brain. Bad cut tin could cause blood poisoning. Broken bone might heal crooked, leaving you permanently disabled. Common childhood diseases that modern children survive easily were often fatal in feudal Japan. Tuberculosis, dysentery, typhoid, smallpox, all prevalent, all deadly, all without effective treatment. Cumulative effect, physical hardship, inadequate food, constant fear, moral compromise, social isolation, lack of comfort, medical danger, would create state of chronic distress that would fundamentally alter your personality and psychological functioning. You wouldn't be yourself anymore. You'd become something harder, colder, more damaged. And here's final brutal truth. Even if you somehow adapted, even if you became hard enough to survive training and functional enough to conduct missions, you'd probably still die young. Historical evidence suggests ninja work was extremely dangerous. And while we don't have precise mortality statistics, logical inference is that most ninjas didn't live to old age. You'd die from injury sustained during mission, or from disease contracted while operating in unsanitary conditions, or from infection that would be trivial to treat with antibiotics but is fatal without them. Or you'd be captured, tortured for information, and executed. Or you'd just wear out from accumulated damage, your body giving out decades earlier than it would in modern circumstances. So no, you wouldn't last day as ninja. You'd be overwhelmed by physical demands within hours. Hunger, cold, constant exertion, lack of any comfort or relief would break your will to continue. Fear would paralyze you. Moral weight would crush you. Isolation would drive you into depression. And even if you somehow pushed through all of this, probability of death or permanent injury would eliminate you soon enough. This isn't pessimism or disrespect for human resilience. It's realistic assessment of what historical reality actually entailed and how poorly modern people are prepared for it. We've been shaped by very different circumstances. Our strengths lie elsewhere. Ninjas weren't superhuman. They were humans systematically prepared from childhood for specific environment through training that would be considered abusive by modern standards, operating in culture that had normalized hardships we can't imagine, with no alternative except failure and death. Understanding why we wouldn't last isn't about diminishing our own capabilities. It's about truly comprehending what ninja life actually entailed and respecting genuine human cost of that profession, rather than romanticizing it into comfortable fantasy. Conclusion. What the shadows teach us. You've traveled through real world of ninja, from mountain villages of Iga and Koga to blood-soaked battlefields of Sengoku period. From brutal training beginning in early childhood to desperate missions where capture meant torture and death. From actual weapons and techniques to historical figures like Hattori Hanzo, stripped of supernatural embellishments but remarkable in their own right. You've witnessed slow decline of profession as political unification eliminated chaos that had created it. And through it all, one truth has emerged clearly. Reality of ninja life was nothing like legends suggest. It was harder, uglier, more frightening, and more morally compromising than romantic fantasies dominating popular culture. But here's final revelation that changes everything. The transformation of ninjas from historical reality to global myth tells us something important about ourselves. We desperately want to believe in mysterious warriors who operate beyond normal human limitations. We want shadows to contain magic, rather than desperate humans doing terrible things to survive. This desire for myth over reality isn't harmless. It dishonors genuine human endurance of real ninjas. They weren't mystical beings, blessed with supernatural powers. They were people damaged by brutal circumstances into forms that could function in one of history's most violent periods. They deserve to be remembered accurately, not for abilities they never possessed, but for genuine endurance they demonstrated. They survived and sometimes thrived despite conditions that would destroy most people. They developed sophisticated skills and techniques, achieving remarkable results with modest means. They created professional culture that preserved knowledge and maintained standards despite operating outside normal social structures. But they paid terrible price for these achievements. They lived in fear, died young, existed on margins of society that valued their services but despised their methods. They were used and discarded, praised when useful and forgotten when obsolete. They had no retirement, no security, no guarantee that sacrifices would be remembered or honored. The transformation of this grim reality into entertainment, myth serves nobody well. It creates false expectations about historical ninjas and obscures actual human experiences of people who live that life. It turns genuine tragedy into comfortable adventure, replaces uncomfortable truth with pleasant fantasy. So when you watch ninja movie or play ninja video game, enjoy fantasy for what it is. But remember, it's fantasy. Real ninjas wouldn't recognize themselves in those depictions. They'd probably be confused, perhaps amused, possibly offended by how their profession has been transformed. And remember that you, modern person with comfortable bed, abundant food, medical care, and personal freedoms, wouldn't last day in their world, not because you're weak, but because you've been prepared for very different challenges. Skills serving you well in 21st century would be useless in 15th century Iga. Values guiding you would be liabilities. Expectations you hold about human dignity, personal autonomy, and physical safety simply didn't exist. Ninja world was one of constant hunger, unrelenting fear, brutal violence, and moral compromise. It demanded psychological hardness that came at enormous cost. It broke far more people than it made, and it ended not with honor or glory, but with irrelevance, as history moved on and left profession behind. This is truth myths obscure. This is reality deserving to be understood, even though it's far less comfortable than fantasy. This is human cost that should be remembered rather than romanticized away. If you found this journey into actual world of ninja valuable, if you appreciate historical truth even when it contradicts comfortable legends, consider subscribing to this channel. There are so many other historical realities waiting to be explored, so many other myths ready to be examined against evidence, so many other stories deserving to be told truthfully rather than romantically. Until next time, sleep well, knowing that whatever challenges you face in modern life, at least you're not facing brutal realities that ninjas endured. History can teach us much, but one lesson stands out. Be grateful for world we've built, with all its flaws, because alternatives that history offers are far, far worse. Shadows have always been dangerous places. Ninjas walked them because they had no choice. We can honor their memory best by understanding what they actually experienced, rather than pretending it was something more palatable. Good night.